The pharmacist called me the day after my husband's funeral and said, "I found something. You need to hear this in person." Then he added, "Don't tell your stepdaughter or her husband. Not yet." When I sat down across from him and he slid that folder across the counter, I felt the floor drop out from under me. If you're new here, stick around, because this story is going to take you somewhere you don't expect. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. My name is Linda Hargrove. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years teaching 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary in Dayton, Ohio, and I was married to my husband Alex for 35 years. This is his story as much as it's mine, maybe more. The funeral was on a Thursday at Sunrise Memorial on Wilmington Pike. It was one of those flat, gray October mornings where the sky doesn't seem to commit to anything. Not rain, not sun, just a heavy stillness that matched exactly how I felt. I stood in the front row in the navy dress I'd worn to our niece's wedding 2 years earlier, looking at a casket that held the only man I had loved since I was 26 years old, and I kept waiting for it to feel real. It didn't. Alex had died 9 days earlier. The paramedics called it a cardiac event. Sudden, they said, especially with his history, especially at 66. I believed them because I had no reason not to. Alex had a heart condition for the better part of a decade, managed carefully with medication, monitored by a cardiologist he liked and trusted. These things happen, everyone told me. I nodded along because what else was there to do? Alex had a daughter from his first marriage, Renee, 34 years old, and her husband Craig, who had moved back to the area about 2 years before Alex passed, after Craig lost his job in logistics somewhere out east. When they came back, Renee started coming around more, which at first felt like a blessing. Alex had always wished he'd been closer to her growing up, and here she was in her 30s, finally wanting to be part of his life. She and Craig started helping out, driving Alex to his cardiology appointments, sitting in on conversations with his financial advisor, managing his weekly pill organizer so Dad doesn't have to keep track of everything himself. I welcomed it. I was grateful for it, honestly, because Alex's health had been declining and I couldn't be everywhere at once. About 40 people came to the service. Neighbors, a few of Alex's old coworkers from the plant, my sister down from Columbus. Renee sat in the front pew next to Craig, and I remember noticing, in that strange, detached way grief lets you notice things, that neither of them cried. Not once. Craig kept checking his phone, angling it away from the pastor, and Renee kept leaning over to murmur something to him, quick and low, the kind of whispering that looks less like comfort and more like logistics. At exactly 10:40 in the morning, near the end of the service, my phone buzzed in my purse. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I glanced down and saw the name on the screen, Nolan's Pharmacy. I stepped into the hallway outside the chapel, heart already picking up speed for no reason I could name yet, and when I answered, the voice on the other end belonged to Gary Nolan, the pharmacist who had filled Alex's prescriptions for almost 10 years. His voice was tight, in a way I had never heard from him. Gary was the kind of pharmacist who remembered your grandkids' names and asked about your garden. Hearing that same steady voice go thin and clipped told me something was wrong before he said a single word about what. "Linda," he said, "I need you to come by the pharmacy today. Not tomorrow, today." "Gary, we're at the service right now," I said, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't carry back into the chapel. "I know. I'm sorry. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. I found something going through Alex's records this morning, after I saw the obituary. I need to show you in person." A pause. "And Linda, listen to me. Don't mention this call to Renee or Craig yet. Not until we've talked. I want to explain something about my family before I go any further, because none of what happens next makes sense without it. Alex and I built a good, quiet life on a factory pension and my teacher's salary. Nothing fancy, but we owned our home on Delacroix Avenue outright. We had a modest retirement account, and we helped Renee and Craig when they needed it, which over the past year had become more often than I like to admit. Craig hadn't found steady work since the layoff. Renee did some part-time bookkeeping. The two of them had started coming around for Sunday dinner, then Tuesday check-ins, then Renee offering, out of nowhere, to help organize Dad's pills and paperwork since he's got so much on his plate these days. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Alex hadn't either. Looking back now, that's exactly the problem. In the weeks before Alex died, something had shifted in him that I hadn't paid close enough attention to. He got tired earlier in the evenings. He complained his chest felt tight sometimes, even after taking his medication, said his heart raced oddly some mornings, and his cardiologist adjusted his dosage twice trying to sort it out. Renee had started coming by on Mondays and Thursdays, always with the same explanation, to refill Dad's organizer for the week so he doesn't mix anything up. One Thursday in September, I came home early from a doctor's appointment of my own and found Renee alone in our kitchen with Alex's pill organizer open on the counter and Alex asleep in his recliner in the middle of the afternoon, which he almost never did. Renee smiled at me and said Dad just wore himself out working in the yard and left about 10 minutes later. I didn't think anything of it. My husband trusted his daughter. I trusted my husband's judgment. 4 days before he died, Alex also asked me, almost offhand, if I remembered signing some paperwork with him back in July about updating our power of attorney, just in case anything happens as we get older. I told him I didn't remember signing anything like that. He frowned and said Craig had mentioned bringing something like that by for us to look over, and he must have just forgotten doing it. We let it go. We had no reason not to. On the morning he died, a Sunday, I was at church early for choir practice. Alex called Craig first because my phone was in the car. By the time I got home 20 minutes later, the paramedics were already loading him into the ambulance. He was gone before we reached the hospital. Cardiac arrest, they told me. Sudden, unexpected. Nobody asked a single question beyond that, and in my grief, neither did I. The day of the funeral, standing in that hallway with Gary's voice tight in my ear, all of it came rushing back at once. The pill organizer, the paperwork Alex didn't remember signing, the way Renee and Craig had been circling around us for months, like they were waiting on something. Gary, tell me what's going on, I said. I can't explain it over the phone, Linda. Please, just come by this afternoon, and whatever you do, don't mention this call to Renee or Craig. My hands were shaking by the time I hung up. I went back into the chapel, sat through the final 20 minutes without hearing a word of it. When the service ended and everyone started filing toward their cars for the burial, I told Renee I had some paperwork from Alex's pension office I needed to sort out that afternoon, and that I'd meet everyone back at the house afterward. Renee barely looked up from her phone. Sure, whatever you need, Linda. Craig didn't even glance my way. He was already walking toward the parking lot, talking low into his phone, to someone I couldn't see, his stride quick and purposeful, in a way that didn't match a man who'd just buried his father-in-law. I stood there a moment, watching my husband's daughter and her husband hurry away from the man's own funeral like they had somewhere far more important to be, and that cold feeling from the hallway settled deeper into my chest. I got into my car and drove across town to Nolan's Pharmacy on Wayne Avenue with my husband's casket barely in the ground behind me and no idea that the worst part of that day hadn't happened yet. Nolan's was a small, independent pharmacy, the kind that still calls you by name, tucked into a strip mall Alex and I had driven past 1,000 times over the years. I parked out front at noon, still in my funeral dress, and walked in to find Gary waiting for me near the back counter, the store quiet except for the low hum of the refrigeration units. He led me into the small consultation room they use for insurance calls and shut the door behind us. Linda, I want to say this carefully. because I know today, of all days, this is the last thing you need." He slid a folder across the table. I pulled Alex's refill history this morning after I saw his name in the obituary column. Something's been bothering me about his account for months, and I finally sat down and looked at the whole picture. Inside the folder were printouts of Alex's prescription refills going back almost a year. Alex's heart medication, the same prescription he'd been on for years, had started being refilled far more often than it should have been, sometimes 2 weeks early, always picked up in person, always by Craig, always paid in cash instead of going through insurance the way every other refill had for the past decade. Cash refills that frequent on a controlled medication like this, that's unusual enough that our system actually flagged it for review back in July, Gary said. I looked into it at the time, figured maybe there'd been a dosage change I wasn't aware of, made a note to follow up with his cardiologist's office, and then, I'm ashamed to say, I got busy and let it slide. I should have called you directly back then. I didn't. I'm sorry for that. What are you telling me, Gary? He hesitated. There's something else. About 6 weeks ago, Alex came in on his own, without Craig, and asked me something strange. He asked if it was possible for a person to accidentally take too much of their own heart medication without realizing it, if someone else was managing their doses for them. I told him it was possible, but that it would show up clearly in his numbers if his doctor was watching closely. He thanked me and left, and I didn't think much of it until I saw his obituary this morning and put it together with the refill pattern. I sat there in that small room, feeling something break loose in my chest that I didn't have words for yet. Gary told me gently that he didn't want to make any accusations, that he could be wrong, that grief makes people see shadows where there might be nothing at all. But he said he owed it to Alex, and to me, to at least put what he'd noticed in front of me directly, in person, rather than let it sit quietly in a filing cabinet. I drove home that afternoon instead of going to the gathering. I told Renee I wasn't feeling well and needed rest. What I actually did was go through every drawer in Alex's home office, looking for anything that might explain what Gary had shown me. In the back of his desk, taped to the underside of a drawer, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in Alex's handwriting and a note clipped to the front in his brother Eric's writing that said, "Alex asked me to hold on to this and only give it to Linda if anything happened to him. I didn't know what was in it. I'm giving it to you now." I called Eric that same night. He came over within the hour, and together we opened the envelope Alex had left with him weeks earlier. Inside, in Alex's own handwriting, was a letter describing his growing unease over the past few months. He wrote that he'd started feeling foggy and unsteady some mornings in a way that didn't match how he'd felt on this medication for years. He wrote that he'd asked Craig about a power of attorney document he didn't remember signing, and Craig had brushed it off, but something in Craig's face when Alex pushed had made him uneasy enough to quietly ask his brother Eric to hold on to a letter just in case. He wrote that he didn't want to believe what he was starting to suspect about his own daughter, but that he wasn't willing to stay silent about it either. Eric and I sat at my kitchen table until nearly midnight, going through what we had: the refill records from Gary, Alex's letter, the unsigned power of attorney neither of us remembered agreeing to. It wasn't proof of anything criminal yet, not on its own, but it was more than enough to make both of us understand that something had been very wrong in this house for months, and that Alex had known it too. Eric had a friend from his years working security at the courthouse, a retired detective named Sam DeLuca who did private investigative work these days. Eric called him the next morning, and Sam agreed to meet with us that same afternoon. Sam went through everything twice, quiet through most of it, and then said what neither Eric nor I wanted to hear out loud. "This is enough to open a real investigation. It's not enough yet to guarantee a conviction. We need the pharmacy records pulled officially through proper channels. We need a forensic look at that power of attorney signature, And if you're willing, Linda, a camera in this house for a short while would likely give us everything else we need. People like this, when they think nobody's listening, they talk. I sat there in my own kitchen, my husband 9 days in the ground, being asked to walk back into my life and pretend everything was normal, while my stepdaughter and her husband believed they'd gotten away with something unthinkable. It was one of the hardest things anyone had ever asked of me. I said yes without much hesitation, because Alex had trusted me with the truth in that envelope, and I wasn't about to waste it. Sam installed 2 small cameras in the house 2 days later, one in a smoke detector in the kitchen, one tucked into a bookshelf in the den, while Renee and Craig believed I was staying with my sister in Columbus to grieve. I moved back home the following week and told everyone I just needed to be around Alex's things for a while. It took 13 days. 13 days of sitting across the table from Renee and Craig at dinner, nodding along as they gently brought up helping me settle Alex's affairs, watching Craig mention the house on Delacroix Avenue twice, asking when I thought I might be ready to think about downsizing. Every night I went to bed feeling sick over it. Every morning I got up and did it again, because Sam had told me the moment they felt fully safe was the moment they'd stop being careful. On the 14th day, it happened. Renee and Craig came by for dinner, and after I went upstairs early claiming I was tired, the kitchen camera caught them alone at the table, voices low but clear. Craig said, word for word, "Once she signs off on the house, we're done. We don't even need to touch the retirement account directly anymore." Renee answered, "Just be glad the medication thing never got flagged. That pharmacist almost caught the pattern back in the summer." Craig laughed and said, "Nobody double-checks an old man's heart pills, Renee. Nobody ever does." Sam had that footage saved within the hour. Combined with the pharmacy refill records pulled through an official request and a forensic handwriting analysis confirming the power of attorney signatures had been forged, Sam told us we finally had what he called an airtight case. We decided to bring it forward at the reading of Alex's will, which our family attorney, a woman named Carol Jennings, who had handled our estate paperwork for 15 years, had already scheduled for the following week. Renee and Craig had no idea Sam DeLuca would be sitting quietly in the small office next door, or that 2 detectives would be parked outside waiting on his signal. I spent that week acting exactly the way I had for the past 13 days. Quiet, tired, cooperative, letting Renee believe things were proceeding exactly as she'd hoped. She even hugged me the morning of the meeting and told me she was proud of how strong I was being. I let her arms wrap around me, thinking about that recording sitting on Sam's laptop, and felt nothing but cold, steady patience. We all sat down in Carol's office at 10 in the morning, Craig in a gray suit, Renee in black, both of them composed, clearly expecting a simple formality before they collected what they believed was already theirs. Carol went through the standard opening of the will and then, right on cue, looked at me and asked if there was anything I wanted to add before continuing. "Actually, yes," I said, and I watched Craig's face shift, just slightly, the first flicker of unease. "Before we go any further, I think it's time this family saw what Alex left behind." I nodded toward the door, and Sam DeLuca walked in carrying his laptop, followed a moment later by 2 detectives Craig clearly recognized from somewhere, because the color drained out of his face immediately. Renee's voice came out sharp. "What is this? What's going on?" I looked at her steadily and said, "Alex is exactly what's going on." Sam set the laptop on the table and played the kitchen footage without a word of introduction. Craig's own voice filled that small office clear as day, talking about the house, about not needing to touch the account directly anymore. Then Renee's voice, laughing, saying nobody double-checks an old man's heart pills. The room went dead silent, except for that recording playing out loud, every word landing like a hammer. Renee's face went white, then red, and she stood up so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. That's not what it sounds like. That's out of context. Sit down, Sam said calmly, showing his credentials for the first time. There are two detectives right outside this office, and everything you say from this point forward can be used against you. Forgery of a legal document, financial exploitation of an elder, and a pending toxicology review connected to an exhumation request already filed with the coroner's office. Craig hadn't said a word yet. He just sat there staring at the table, and I watched something break in his face. Not innocence, because that was long gone, but the specific look of a man who finally understood there was nowhere left to run. "Linda," Craig said, voice cracking. "I never wanted it to actually kill him. It was just supposed to slow him down, keep him confused enough that he wouldn't fight the paperwork." I felt Eric's hand land on my shoulder, steady, grounding me, because for 1 second the room tilted, and all I could see was Alex in that hospital bed I never reached in time. But I didn't yell. I didn't need to. Alex sat at that table every Sunday for years, making room for the two of you at his table, I said quietly, and you sat across from him counting down until you got the house. The detectives came in 2 minutes later. Renee cried the whole way out. Craig didn't say another word. It's been almost 10 months now since that morning in Carol Jennings' office. Craig pled guilty to forgery and financial exploitation of an elder and is currently serving a 5-year sentence at the Ross Correctional Institution. Renee's case went further. The exhumation and toxicology report confirmed elevated levels of medication in Alex's system far beyond anything his cardiologist had ever prescribed, consistent with a slow, deliberate pattern rather than an accident. Renee was convicted of involuntary manslaughter alongside the forgery and elder exploitation charges. She's serving 9 years. I still live in the house on Delacroix Avenue. Some mornings it's quiet in a way that used to hurt, and now mostly it just feels honest. I got the money back through the courts, every dollar of it, though honestly the money was never really the point. Gary Nolan and I still talk from time to time when I stop in for my own prescriptions, and he tells me now that Alex used to mention me at the counter more than I ever knew, always proud, always certain I'd do right by him if it ever came to this. Eric and I have grown close in a way neither of us expected, two people who loved the same man and refused to let his last wish go unheard. I set up a small memorial fund in Alex's name through the cardiac care unit at the hospital where he was first diagnosed, for families who need help affording the kind of close, careful monitoring that might have caught what was happening to him sooner. It's not much yet, but it's growing, and every dollar in it carries his name forward doing something good, which is exactly the kind of thing he would have wanted. I think about that hallway outside the funeral home a lot. Gary's voice, tight and careful on the phone, telling me to come see something before it was too late to matter. My husband protected me one last time, in his own quiet way, and I intend to spend whatever years I have left making sure that protection meant something. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, drop a comment, and let me know your thoughts, and subscribe if you want more real stories like this one. I'll see you in the next one.